So even though Formula 1 cars today are absolute rocket ships that have technology that almost rivals that of the USS Enterprise, they're actually not the most technologically advanced cars ever seen in Formula 1. Well, they are and they aren't. You know that belief that runs around on an internet. This guy's car drives itself because it's the best one and therefore this guy's a talentless hack. But you know, this was also true when the red car won every week and the purple one as well. Because that's what happens when you put the best drivers in the best cars. You get results week after week after week. You know, I'm actually of the belief that assuming the car held up for every race that season, Damon Hill's 1996 Williams would have won every single race in the hands of Michael Schumacher. Which is probably the hottest take you're ever going to get on this channel. But, you know, it depends on who you support really. If it's your guy in the best car, oh yeah, it's talent. But if it's the guy you don't like, it's the car. But like I said, today's cars have immensely complicated hybrid engines, which I actually think are pretty cool on the engineering front. But modern F1 cars don't have any driver aids beyond power steering or sequential flappy paddle gearboxes, if you want to call those driver aids. But again, there's that belief on the internet that the ability to use the H pattern is the epitome of talent. But there was a time when Formula 1 cars had so much tech on them they had to ban it for fear of the drivers A, not being in control of the car because the computers were doing all the work, and B, drivers taking too many risks and the cars getting too quick because the computers were doing all the work. And it started way back in the 1980s. In 1989, turbos were done away with and F1 went to this pick one formula of a 3.5 litre 8, 10 or 12 naturally aspirated engine. And since this is the sport that pushes the boundaries of engineering and does whatever it can for every microsecond, a guy called John Barnard, who was then working for Ferrari, devised a new concept of changing gear through a lever or a paddle on the steering wheel, so that drivers didn't need to take their hands off the wheel and change gear. And this gear change was also, crucially, faster. But it had a few teething problems in testing, being new technology obviously. And more often than not, over the course of the season, the gearbox blew and the thing had to be repaired or replaced. But at the 1989 Brazilian Grand Prix, Nigel Mansell became the first person to win a Formula 1 Grand Prix without the use of the traditional H-pattern gearbox. Like I said, the thing was unreliable, much like the rest of the car. And Gerhard Berger, his teammate, only finished 3 races all season, finishing second at Monza and Jerez and winning at Portugal. But Berger also had to miss the Monaco Grand Prix because of his shunt at Tamburello at the San Marino Grand Prix where his car burst into flames. Mansell did do a bit better on the reliability front. He too finished every race he finished on the podium and he finished 4th overall in the standings. But all the other teams saw this and soon cottoned on, and they all tried to develop their own system. Ferrari brought an improved system to the 1990 season and McLaren and Williams kept the H pattern for competition purposes while they were still developing their own in the background. Interestingly, the McLaren was better over one lap, but the Ferrari was a tiny bit better in race trim, and the Williams was considered to be the faster car out of all 3 of them, but Patrese and Boutsen just weren't good enough. It was, Mansell then tested the car at the end of the season and absolutely marmalised any test time set by Patrese. But it was 1991 when the whole technological wizardry stuff took off. Williams debuted their semi-automatic gearbox and coupled it with traction control to maximise rear-end grip coming out of corners. But just like the MP420 in 2005, the fastest car overall didn't win the championship. There were too many teething issues, and Senna in his inferior McLaren was able to mop up where Williams faltered. Senna was still running the H pattern, which probably allowed him to win that Brazilian Grand Prix stuck in 6th gear. I mean, that will need confirming. I mean, I'm not an engineer or a mechanic or anything, so if it did help him, I'm all ears. But the Williams did get better over the course of the season, but still too unreliable. Mansell lost the Canadian Grand Prix when the electronics failed at the hairpin on the final lap, but Senna was too far ahead, and he also had a flappy paddle gearbox now, and I believe, and it might need confirming by Senna and McLaren enthusiasts in the comments, that the McLaren gearbox was the first to have the electronic auto cut and the electronic auto blip, which gained precious tenths over the lap. And since the McLaren system was way more reliable, there was no way Williams could catch McLaren as the races ran out. And to make matters worse, Mansell was disqualified at Estoril after he left the pits and then the wheel proceeded to fly off. The lollipop man who let him go, which then resulted in the wheel flying off because it wasn't attached properly, was a guy called Peter Windsor, now an F1 journalist. But instead of Williams just going, better figure out this bit before we work on this bit, they knew that motorsport wasn't going to stand still for them while they ironed out all the issues. So they worked out the technical gremlins on the gearbox and the traction control, and added the legendary active suspension, the code for which designed by Paddy Lowe. The FW15B was not too dissimilar to its 1991 predecessor at first glance, but if you want to impress your girlfriend or your dad with useless F1 trivia, you can tell the two cars apart by the bulges where the suspension meets the main bodywork, because that's where the servos for the system went. I'd show videos of it all working, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole of copyright again. The active suspension meant that the optimal ride height could be achieved throughout the whole race, well, at least as close to optimal ride height. There was no refueling then, as now, and the ride height would go up over the course of the race as the weight of the fuel burned off, which could affect aerodynamic stability, given at that time cars were flat-bottomed and ran super low ride heights. Now, Lotus had toyed with the idea of active suspension as early as 1982, but it never came to anything because ground effect, which it was designed to optimise, got banned for 1983. Lotus tried the system again in 1987, but Senna gave it the biggest amount of thumbs down not seen again until Rebecca Black uploaded Friday. Mansell and Patrese would turn a knob in the cockpit, and I'll leave a link to a Top Gear article that has pictures that you can look at while you've got this on in the background, to alter the ride height on an as-needed basis. And Williams was so proud of the system they velcroed a piece of suede over the mechanicals just in case Mansell or Patrese crashed and took the entire front end off, so nobody would see what they'd come up with, take pictures and then copy the design. And it was probably here that the first instance of tech and driver talent met up. Mansell was such an aggressive driver. He could yeet the car around at warp 3, while Patrese, who had joined F1 in the 1970s, was a boomer by comparison and just didn't get along with this new tech that the kids were using. But the active suspension worked mighty well on its first outing, and the Williams became the car to have for 1992. The qualifying gaps between Mansell on pole and the first of the non-Williams cars for some of the races of the season I'll put on screen because the times are amazing. Mansell obliterated the competition, and Ferrari and McLaren were left in the dust, which caused a great deal of frustration for Senna, who now wanted a Williams because that was the best car on the grid. And because Prost, after a year out, was going to Williams for 1993 to replace Mansell, who was off to America to do IndyCar, Senna in a Williams wasn't going to happen anytime soon. But by 1993, all of the top teams had driver aids of some description, and the ones I can find data for I'll put on the screen for you. Even though Williams weren't the first, they were by far the pioneers. For 1993, they modified the active suspension to adapt on its own and added anti-lock brakes to the multitude of gizmos on board the FW15C. This allowed Prost and Hill to brake harder, later and deeper into corners, trail braking on the trail braking. Senna also had automatic gearboxes and traction control, but the MP48 was still nowhere near what the Williams was. It was legitimately his talent that got him close to actually beating Prost that season. The 15C was dominant, but Prost, like Patrese, didn't really get along with the active car. As it was in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren's battle was actually with Benetton more than it was with Williams. The 1993 season saw the most technologically advanced Formula 1 cars we've ever seen, despite 2021 being the peak of technology virtually, everywhere else. And because drivers had suspension that adjusted itself, brakes that never locked and computers that negated wheel spin, the FIA was getting concerned that drivers were relying too much on the computers to get rid of their mistakes. F1 wasn't about the drivers. Okay, Formula 1 has never been entirely about the driver. It's like 65-35 in favour of the car, but the FIA was thinking that it was now all the car doing all the work. So at the Canadian Grand Prix, the FIA said that for 1994, driver aids except for semi-automatic gearboxes and power steering were going to be banned. As you can imagine, the teams weren't particularly happy. The technical directive had been issued pretty much mid-season, and most of the teams had already half finished or finished their 1994 cars. But for some people, like Steve Matchett, who was working for Benetton at that time, were happy that active suspension had been banned. Because, hot oil pissing in his face at 2,500 psi if the wrong thing was taken off at the wrong time wasn't exactly his idea of fun. And the snowball effect of banning the driver aids led to what happened during the 1994 season, such as the death of Senna, the Option 13 controversy, and so on. But by the late 1990s, early 2000s, the FIA found it actually couldn't police this traction control ruling and allowed it back for the 2001 Spanish Grand Prix before getting rid of it in favour of spec ECU units at the end of the 2007 season. But despite the hybrids, the sensors, and the gigabytes of data sent to the pit walls from modern Formula 1 cars, screw this lighting, the 1993 season saw the most technologically advanced cars we've ever seen. Cars from 28 years ago. So this has been why the 1990s had the most tech-laden cars ever. If you've learned something here today, then give the video a thumb up, and for more like this, then hit subscribe and get that bell on so you never miss a future video. Big thanks to the good people of Patreon who continue to support this channel, and if you want to join them or just join in the Discord stuff, all links along with a link to a Top Gear article about the FW15C and the active suspension stuff will all be down in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye. Right, Formula Challenge practice. I might actually be in Split 1 tonight.